the civil strife, education in Liberia was in a steady state of decline, and this has been exacerbated by our civil strife. There is a woeful state of our educational system across all spectrum, from kindergarten, secondary school, university education, technical and vocational education. Also for health. Prior to the war, the health system in Liberia was in a dire strait. When I was a medical student in Liberia, it was an open secret that health education was not given a priority. Our schools, both medical and paramedical, were neglected. Our health system suffered the consequences. The JFK Medical Center that previously was our pride became a laughing stock. There was a complete absence of post-medical education, and we suffered serious brain drain. So we left against this backdrop to discuss health and education in Liberia. I have 4 distinguished personalities who will be discussing the efforts, the challenges, and possibilities attending to the development and resuscitation of our health and educational system. Our first member of the panel is Dr. Mariah Seaton. Dr. Seaton she served as an education and administrative consultant in the city of Chicago for many years. She's also an advocate for equity in education. She is also an activist for social justice. She's played a role in many diaspora organizations, including being the executive director of the social services of EULA and the program planner for LEDI. Dr. Seaton has a PhD with emphasis in public administration from the Roosevelt University College in Illinois. Our second member of the panel is Dr. Abdoulaye Doucouré. He's a journalist, filmmaker, and former French communication professor. He's an associate editor of The Perspective, which is a respectable online magazine. And he is also the owner of ATSC Media, a consulting firm. He served as public relations and information counselor at the Liberian Embassy previously and was a former advisor to interim president Irma Sawyer. Also, just in our past elections, he served as media advisor to candidate Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. Our third member of the panel is Mr. Taylor, who believes that success in business is meaningless unless it is directly linked to improving the lifestyle of the most vulnerable along our social pyramid. He spent his knowledge in business and has set up a private sector business model to improve access to business health care services and essential drugs in sub-Saharan Africa. And the goal of this project is to reverse the brain drain that we've seen in sub-Saharan Africa and parts of the underdeveloped world. Our fourth member of the panel is Emmanuel Dono, PhD, who is president and CEO of LifeWorks Healthcare Incorporated, situated in Minnesota. And this organization specializes in refugee and immigrant mental health services. He has worked as a senior executive in many private and public sector or healthcare organizations. He received his PhD in applied research with specialties in refugee and immigrant mental health and youth development policy. He has several publications in academic and popular press. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Clarence Diaski, and I will serve as a moderator. I ask all of you to welcome my panelists.
have 5 minutes to do justice to a 9-page paper, but I will do my best. I'll make sure that this document is passed on to members of the press and perspective, who will make sure that you all get a copy of it. His Excellency, Ambassador Minor, Dr. Shannon, other Liberian government officials, prospective investors in Liberia, all of Liberia, friends of Liberia, members of the clergy, people of Minnesota, Mrs. Martha Sano, President of the Liberians in Minnesota present, organizers of this unique occasion, friends and all. I'm delighted to be a part of this panel because education is something that is core to our being. However, there were major challenges that we all saw during the 14-year interruption in the lives of students. And those hindrances to the educational development included access, completion and retention, the inadequate funding and the enormous destruction of the country's educational facilities and infrastructures. Access to education is a key concern and must be a key concern to all of us, especially funding. The underlying causes can be traced to severe shortages or complete access of school or absence of school. I was in Liberia on 2 occasions in December, and there were gains that were made in Monrovia. In December, I attended the Lahidi conference at the University of Liberia, and I was able to travel around the city, and I saw a surge of schools, and I was impressed. But my concern was schools being in the interior, where we don't have that access. So there were difficulties, and there are difficulties, especially in terms of gender education. We know our young girls and our young women have had to leave school to either get married, get pregnant, or to do other things that hinder them. So it is the role of the government. The government is committed this time around. I had conversations with my colleague, Dr. Kante of the University of Liberia, and Dr. Cotto, who was here recently during the July 26th program. So he impressed upon me that gains are being made, there's work being done in funding education, that all Liberians will have access to equal education in Liberia. Say for instance now, the government have a policy of free education for all. So that's a plus now that we have to, that we are impressed by this government. The 14-year Civil Council has serious impact on Liberian youth and school-age children, high school and college-bound students. Liberian students and their parents will be set by all these calamities of the war. We saw interruptions in the academic pursuit, forcing children as laborers and not as students, which should be a concern to all of us. Child labor in Liberia is an outrage that touches the core of our values, our families, and our economy. The students whose fate are tied to their parents continue to suffer economically, socially, politically, and all the things that the speaker after speaker spoke about today. So in the absence of education, there will be a shortage of all the things we want to achieve, all the things that were discussed tonight or during this day. Our values will be compromised, the norms of students will be compromised. We saw a rise in child soldiers during the 14-year war. Children under age 15 became combatants. The situation even exacerbated by the absence of healthcare facilities, which will be discussed by my colleagues here. The Liberian Civil Council significantly undermines the country's ability in advance of education as well as healthcare. So today, again, I know I have 5 minutes to deliver this 9-page paper, which I will not do. We want to encourage investors to partner with our government. We see the challenges because without education, we will not be able to achieve our goals after this 14-year interruption in our lives. There is an argument that education is the gateway to the future of any generation, and Liberia is no exception. Education is the key for a better life However, for almost 15 years, that speaker after speaker spoke about Liberian children were made to abandon what they call of education. Some were drugged, some were fooled into thinking that war was fun, it was pleasure. They fought for many different rebel factions and even for the Liberian government at times. They served on the front lines, living with nightmares, but there's hope. According to UNICEF, there are some 11,000 Liberian youngsters directly involved who were involved in the conflict are now back into school, so there's a gain. Students are back. As I said, I was in Liberia and I saw the gain. I saw students back into school, and parents were so excited. And the government again is behind education for students and for all students to receive a free education. The future of our children or students. We are glad that the guns are now silent. Now that it appears that the war is finally behind us, the future of the children affected by war and even those who were born after the war confront all of us. And so it is our social responsibility to invest in our young minds. We must act expeditiously so our future leaders can regain hope in the future by having access to quality education. I'm happy that a program that has been devoted for some time to the discussion of education by the government is making more progress and gains. There's a school of thought which could be true that the Liberian Civil War lost meaning because majority of its participants were young in our young minds, which we must invest in. Uneducated children who did not even know what they were fighting for, they fought. As such, any effort in Liberia's reconstruction must not ignore the need to rehabilitate and educate the young people who fought the war. We must also promote education at all levels, especially in trade schools, on the college level, in adult education. Those areas must be emphasized, must be pushed in order to have a better Liberia. Yes, Liberia needs investment in every sector because the entire country suffered the effects of the war. However, it is true that the war took the strength it took because majority of its participants were illiterate. They were not educated. Then we must prioritize education in our reconstructive efforts. We must remold the minds of the war participants and all other Liberians from war to education so that we do not only turn away from warfare, but we can also see education as the best vehicle to a productive Liberia. The other way, which is undesirable, is to ignore education and focus only on the rebuilding of our infrastructure and our economic structures, minus education. All other investments, as needed as they are, could sit on sinking sand. The benefits of focusing our efforts on education are enormous. Firstly, we turn our young people away from warfare to acquiring productive skills. Secondly, the economy will get the necessary technical and other skills it needs to survive. I know I have only 1 minute. So again, I will do everything possible to turn this document over to the press. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. When you talk about education, most of the time we see a bunch of kids and sometimes young women or young men in a classroom with a chalkboard, which is the image we all have. But we're here to talk about investment, and I think I will talk about education in terms of investment. What is it that we Liberians, mostly live here, can do to help the educational process at home? According to the Minister of Education, there are about 950,000 kids between the age of 15 to 20 attending the various schools. They have about 50,000 teachers. And they have between 55 to 40, 60 school classrooms. And I look at this, I say, well, I see customers. I see 1 million potential customers for pencils. I see 1 million customers for books. I see 1 million customers for chalk. So what do we do about that? Are we going to keep importing books, or are we going to write our own textbooks? Print them in Liberia or print them in Ghana at cheaper cost and bring them to our own market and talk about education in our own terms. So that's what I'd like to talk about today, when I talk about education. Not just saying, okay, it's beautiful, we want to send a kid to school, but do they have pencils? Do they have notebooks? Do they have textbooks? I was in Monrovia in July, and I bought an old copy of one of Baltimore's books, The Money Doubler, for $4 US, and it was photocopied. It was photocopied. Somebody photocopied and then stapled together and sold on the market. I said, but I could take the same book and print it in Ghana and sell it for $2 on the market to kids, and they buy it. There were lessons, grammar lessons done on, sometimes on stencils by teachers, photocopied, and sold to students. Why don't we get all these prints together and produce our own textbooks, collect them, print them in Ghana, but it's cheaper than anywhere else, and bring them to the market and then sell them. And I think that's an idea that I would like to pursue with people. I don't know if it's cost effective to produce pencils and pens, but we need to have 1 million kids going to school every day, using 2-3 sets of pen and pencils every day. You have a market. If they use 3-5 copybooks every week, you have a market. So I think we should think about these things. Because when we talk about infrastructure of the school system, we have to forget about, we should not forget that it's also a market for somebody. If we don't take our market, we keep relegating our power to develop our own intellectual marketplace to somebody else. And when we talk about sovereignty, we talk about independence, we talk about control of market, we have to go at where it starts first, at the grass level. The kids in school need a textbook that has a picture of Liberia, that has a picture of the president or a picture of your grandfather on it, but he needs to have that as a reference. That is first education. That is first sense of identity. That is something, say, a pencil made in Monrovia, pencil not made in China. So I think there are a lot of things to talk about. So I think we have to talk about, we can talk about all things about, yeah, the market is small, it's cheaper to produce this in China, but hey, we have to be able to control our own market. At some point we have to say, no, we're not going to import junk, we will make our own junk. Thank you.
Someone asked me earlier, said, are you also from Liberia? And before I can answer the question, a person next to me who knew me, I said, no, Mr. Taylor is from Ghana, but he's of an African. So I'm from everywhere. We talk about health care. A lot of Liberians are located in Ghana, so certainly I also feel that I'm partly Liberian, even though I've never been there. My tailor is not insignificant of where I'm from. I needed to clear that first. Why healthcare? Why invest in healthcare? First, I'd like to draw your attention to some disturbing facts. Over 1 million people die of malaria in the world. 90% of those who die of malaria occur in sub-Saharan Africa. That's very disturbing. Some people who know me and my background, I'm an entrepreneur by nature and by trade, ask me the question, if you crisscross United States, building offices in 15 cities around technology, what are you doing with healthcare in Africa? The question is very simple. Because the healthcare system in sub-Saharan Africa is in crisis. Would you believe that over 50,000 people died of malaria last year in Liberia? And do you know the cost of treatment for malaria is less than 50 cents? So for less than 50 cents, we could have saved some of these people from dying. Tuberculosis kill over 2 million people a year, and most of them happen in sub-Saharan Africa. Do you know the top 5 diseases in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa? Or let me say specifically Liberia. They're the top 5 diseases: malaria, upper respiratory diseases, diarrhea, anemia, and basic worm infestation. Do you really know that these top 5 diseases, these are all preventable diseases? We're not talking diseases that take you to the hospital for surgical operation. These are basic preventable diseases. Are you aware that these diseases kill over 85% of Liberians? Preventable diseases. Cost of treatment, less than 50 cents. There are some obstacles and opportunities in healthcare in Liberia. Let me draw your attention to some of these. Are you aware that 90% of all the clinics and hospitals in Liberia are located in the cities? Do you realize that over 80% of the people in Liberia do not live in the cities? Isn't that interesting? We have a distribution problem. There's counterfeit, adulterated drugs that are available on the market. You pick a drug from these goods from drugstores, and some of these are actually expired drugs, they counterfeit drugs, they adulterated drugs. What's written on the container is not exactly what inside that you're going to take. Very little supervision. In Liberia and most of our West African countries, the government controls the healthcare system. The hospitals and the clinics are controlled by the government. Interestingly enough, the people actually spend their money going to private doctors. So the money is not being allocated to follow the behavior of people. There's brain drain occurring in West Africa. Liberia is no different. You realize that Great Britain issues a lot of visas and entice people to come work for them in developed countries. And Great Britain is not alone. I only single them out because as a person from Ghana, in 1 year, 2 years ago, Great Britain issued 850 work permits to doctors and nurses from Ghana alone, and that's 1 year. And Liberia is no different. Donor countries, interestingly enough, give developing countries about $2 billion in donor money a year. Interestingly enough, it costs sub-Saharan African countries over $2 billion to fix their healthcare system. So if they just help us to fix our healthcare system, that $2 billion that came in, we wouldn't even need it. It can go towards investment. Donor countries seem to empower our governments. They give our governments the money and the assistance and expect the government to take care of the people. Maybe there's nothing wrong with that. But what we notice in developed countries is that they empower the people, not the government. The people are the ones who pay the taxes. The people are the ones who are involved in promoting private sector development. And yet, that's what we call democracy, right? But when they come to Africa, they empower the government and expect the government to take care of the people. There are some possible solutions to our healthcare crisis. Since I have a minute, I'll condense it. Number one, I believe there are 2 ways to address that, government and the private sector. The government can get involved by learning from Ghana. Liberian government can learn the Ghana's experiment. It's something called the National Health Insurance System that has been implemented in Ghana, where every single individual is provided a health care paid for by the government. However, the money actually doesn't all come from the government. Here's how it is. The government of Ghana decided that donor countries bringing money into the country should be harnessed and directed specifically towards a common purpose. And so all monies coming into the country are channeled into this National Health Insurance Plan. The government also, that's about 50% of the money in the pool. Government also contributes about 25%, and the people pay 25% of it through premiums. Now this way, it takes away the financial burden of people. The private sector can get involved. The private sector can get involved through franchising. Franchising is the way we are using to spread improved health access in developing countries. Like in Ghana, we're putting 400 clinics there, making sure that people who don't currently have access do have access. We're doing the same in Uganda. And I believe an enterprising person who here interested in that model can go ahead and implement a franchise and private sector business concept in Liberia as well. The country certainly needs it. Your role, what role can you play? As a person here in Liberia, in the diaspora, you can actually help build the country through remittances. I heard earlier on that the government does not have money. Well, I tell you what, there are certain countries, India, Mexico, Israel, that has rebuilt and become prosperous countries as a result of the people in the diaspora sending money back home. You don't have to be there. You only need to make sure that you bring your money to help the country. So, be a part of it.
The aspect of this conversation that I'm going to focus on is going to be on mental health. Seemingly, when we have conversation about healthcare, or we have all of these conversations, I've heard one word being used here all day: enabling environment. Well, you cannot have an enabling environment in Liberia because all of you in this room, I can assume, have had some secondary trauma. A family member of yours died in the war, or you participated in the war in some form or another. So it means that mental health has